The best games tell a story not just through the narrative, but through the gameplay. Most games fall somewhere on a spectrum. Open world titles give players the freedom to create their own narratives, while linear games put them at the center of a carefully crafted, high production experience. Even multiplayer games can feel like an exciting and unpredictable sports match, each with its own narrative of triumphs, failures, and heroic efforts. Last Train Home is a game that has this concept at its core. Its story and gameplay are tightly woven together, allowing player interaction to shape the journey. Each person who plays Last Train Home will guide a battered group of soldiers across Siberia, but the story that unfolds is the one that you create as their commander. Last Train Home is a crew management RTS survival game developed by THQ Nordic and Ashbourne Games. Set at the end of World War I, you play as a commanding officer of a small group of Czechoslovak legionnaires on a desperate journey across Russia trying to reach their newly formed homeland. But there's a problem. Russia is now embroiled in its own civil war, with the Red and White armies clashing just as World War I has ended. Your journey begins outside of a burning Moscow as you nervously gather your soldiers around your train. Smoke rises as the Red and White armies battle for control of a city that was just your ally. You're caught in the middle, trying to make your way across Russia to Vladivostok where a ship waits to take you home. Along the way, you'll fight to keep your train moving and your soldiers alive as things become more and more desperate. Last Train Home is a game of two parts. First is the crew management, which takes place on the train and the overworld map. Here, you handle the logistics of the trip, assigning soldiers to roles on the train, sending squads out for resources, and managing supplies. The Red Army is after your train, and stopping for too long has consequences. Raids, strafing planes, and the constant pressure of needing to move forward. But pushing ahead too quickly can wear out your soldiers, who are already tired, hungry, sick, or wounded, and you'll be forced to make tough decisions about who to send out and who needs rest. This part of the game has a constant, intense momentum. You're always balancing the need to move forward and collect more resources with the well being of your soldiers. Stop for too long, and the Red Army will catch up to you. Push too hard, and you could find your crew in bad shape just when you need them the most. The condition of your crew is at the heart of every decision you make. Injuries, sickness, and even individual traits affect how well your soldiers perform, not just in their jobs on the train, but also in the combat missions. These are the key challenges in managing your human resources. Alongside energy levels that are always draining, some traits, like being short or clumsy, can have unique impacts in the combat. Shout out to my short king staying big on the battlefield out there. Last Train Home approaches its characters like a party style RPG. Each soldier fills a specific role which they can level up over time, gaining new abilities and stats based on that role. You'll be able to unlock different roles for each soldier, allowing you to mix and match abilities for more flexibility in your squad composition and their roles on the train.
So get to the train station swiftly and quietly. If you have to fight, make it quick and deadly.
The second part of the game is where the real-time strategy combat comes in. At times, you'll need to take a more hands-on approach with the Red Army, so you'll form your squad of up to 10 soldiers and assign each soldier their roles and equipment and send them out. You'll often have some indication of how dangerous the missions will be, and will have to make some careful decisions about which soldiers you'll bring, and even if you'll field a full squad. Since combat missions are a great risk, taking in a squad of soldiers who are already beat up can be a recipe for disaster. The combat controls are a small squad affair. Terrain offers contextual cover to protect your soldiers, and positioning based on that is the key to victory. Each soldier will have activatable abilities based on their class, like throwing grenades or a one-shot sniper kill. Vision plays a large role in deciding how to position and approach different situations, while enemy vision cones are an obstacle to play around. Stealth plays a large role in the combat sandbox here. You'll often sneak from cover to cover to get an understanding of how your enemies are arranged and maybe pick off a few stragglers before attacking outright. You'll often be outgunned in these missions, so stealth, careful maneuvering, and guerrilla tactics are the name of the game here. Most of these missions play out like a series of combat puzzles. You'll scout out groups of enemies to find the best way to approach the situation while putting your soldiers at the smallest amount of risk possible. These encounters can be deadly. Attacking a machine gun nest head on can easily get your soldiers wounded or killed, and such a mistake can put the entire mission at risk. You don't have the advantage in any kind of prolonged shootout either. Enemies are too numerous and your resources too limited to openly attack. So you'll approach these encounters looking to set up ambushes and traps, flank your opponents, and pick them off one at a time with stealth. These encounters are rather well designed, with relatively open maps that provide plenty of options and avenues to complete the mission. They often string together, eliminating one group and taking control of a small area often flows right into the next problem. You'll continually be moving your soldiers to protect your own flanks and gain information, and if you're not careful, you can easily find yourself in over your head by not understanding where your enemies are or underestimating their firepower.
For the Legion!
This all flows nicely back into the gameplay on the train. You'll be able to pick up valuable resources, often bringing back bags full of the fuel, food, and other supplies you need for your journey. These can be a tremendous windfall compared to the relatively stingy and unpredictable points of interest you continually spend your efforts on. However, your soldiers will come back battered and exhausted, which can sometimes complicate getting the train rolling again. This creates a continuity between the two modes of play that is perhaps Last Train Home's most well executed feature. This will have you considering the risks of not only the mission, but of what you'll need to do after. What's more, what opportunities will you pass by now that you need to run a skeleton crew while you keep ahead of the pursuing Red Army? And how well prepared will you be when the next challenge appears? This is the gameplay loop that drives Last Train Home, a constant battle to push forward for more resources at the cost of the one thing you can't find more of, the health and energy of your soldiers. The narrative of Last Train Home is surprisingly good for a strategy game, especially when you consider how sparing it is. Strategy games often struggle to find an effective way to construct a meaningful narrative. Often the characters and events of the story seem to take place off stage and are only indirectly connected to the gameplay. Last Train Home manages to put forward a meaningful narrative by using a light touch. And because the narrative is primarily one of the train and the soldiers, it doesn't need a complex plot or intense interpersonal drama to tell a relevant and meaningful story. The story is immediate, told by your second in command, Captain Langer, who serves as the primary narrator, describing the journey via spoken journal entries and reports, and in some scenes represented by a live actor who perfectly fits the role. These live action portions are particularly good as they portray the parts of the experience that are left to your imagination. The sudden anxiety as the train unexpectedly stops, the barked orders of Langer to the soldiers as they pile off, and the quiet moments as he writes his reports, his worried face contrasting the professional demeanor of his writing.
Isn't it clear we're fighting to return home? To our families? Anyway, families.
There are some other forms of storytelling to back up Langer's exposition, and the mixed media approach here is a little hit or miss. There are these sort of sketch in process scenes which lack the impact of the live action moments and don't produce sketches that seem relevant or recognizable with the narration or even the larger context. It's the same with these Game of Thrones pieces on a map segments that are more evocative of grand strategy and national conflict than the small scope of this handful of refugee soldiers. So the narrative presentation is a bit fragmented and inconsistent, but Langer's narration holds it together well enough that I enjoyed these segments and felt that they added to the game in a way that suited the type of story it was telling, which was really the little moments and relationships you have with each of your soldiers.
It arrived on the day of that fateful battle. The battle that changed everything.
So where are we at with Last Train Home? Well, when I think about games like this, I like to ask the question, is this game greater than the sum of its parts? I think this is an important question when it comes to smaller titles or imperfect games, and this is a lot of what Riley said in his Kinitsugami review a while back. That game had a lot of different parts that on their own really weren't that great, but when taken together, they create an experience that is unique and worth having. But when it comes to Last Train Home, I'm not sure how that arithmetic works out. This game puts forward a compelling idea, but executes so much of it without any of that same inspiration. This game feels like it had a ton of ambition, but no vision on how to get there. And when the wheels met the tracks, so much was compromised with conventional systems and pedestrian ideas. Let's start with the combat. I talked early on about the combat puzzle of this game with its nice map layouts combined with tricky arrangements of enemies and objectives, along with a high penalty for mistakes. And all that is true, the problem isn't the level design, it's the framework. Once the bullets start flying, the simplicity of the design starts to fall apart. Cover provides an incredible amount of protection, while being in the open is a death sentence. things very quickly devolve into a stalemate of pot shots as you grit your teeth at the amount of ammo your soldiers are wasting. I think the designers knew this because from time to time, enemy soldiers will just get up and run for it. At first I thought, wow, the AI is really making this interesting. But it didn't take me long to realize that enemy soldiers will move just to move, and will get picked off rather quickly. So gunfights often boil down to you risking making a move on the flank to get the encounter over with, or playing an incredibly wasteful game of chicken until the AI runs for it. There just isn't much interesting micromanagement going on here for a small squad RTS game.
Engaging!
The problem extends to the classes and characters that make up your squad. Each class brings a variety of abilities and their own flavor of weapon, but unfortunately none of these classes particularly did much to differentiate themselves on the battlefield. There weren't any particularly interesting or impactful abilities, and the overall difference between each class felt so narrow that I really didn't put much thought into the composition of my squad, or their weapons, or using any of the abilities. This resulted in me brute forcing a lot of the scenarios towards the end of the game. And perhaps you could chalk that up to the results of my now well experienced troops and the fancy equipment I had collected, or my own experience commanding my soldiers. But the game didn't make me feel that way. Instead, it just kind of felt like a smorgasbord of small squad RTS staple mechanics without any attention given as to why these mechanics or ideas were picked for this game. And that ended up to a bland soup of combat experience overall. Alright, we know it's the train that really hauls the weight. But does this side of the game make up for what the combat lacks? It does in some ways. I've said already that I enjoyed this part of the game more than the combat, but again, it's plagued with the same lack of vision at the core of the design. The core gameplay loop of the entire game is this idea that as the train moves, you form up squads to collect resources or go on missions that are essentially about collecting more resources to allow you to move on. And that's a gameplay loop that could work. But many of the systems around it, like the combat or what you actually do with the resources, aren't particularly well thought out. Let's talk about the resources themselves. There are a number of them, but only food and fuel truly matter. The other resources, like wood, herbs, metal, and cloth, all serve a very tangential purpose. These are primarily a currency you exchange for various upgrades as your journey progresses. There's nothing wrong with that, except that none of these play into the more well executed ideas within the game. They're strictly upgrades to either your soldiers or your train. There are some ideas that work better, like the fact that both guns and ammunition are finite resources you need to manage. It's possible, for example, to not have enough bullets for your squad to be fully armed, or to share a weapon between soldiers, one taking the gun out on a mission while the other stays behind on the train, because you have two snipers and only one rifle. This was such a good idea that it's a shame it wasn't expanded to the other systems. You experience that moment of the squad gathering around Langer as he passes out the weapons and ammo, and you can just hear him say, "You're on the machine gun for this one, Pavel," which is much more evocative than, "Oh, I have a bunch of metal, let's see which car doesn't have an upgraded stove yet." The game hypes up Siberia from the very beginning. Its cold wastes loom over your entire journey as you are continually reminded of how difficult things will be the farther you travel. And indeed, the game does ratchet up the intensity with extreme cold and less productive expeditions. Things could have been rough, but I had been warned, and because of this, I had diligently upgraded everything. Siberia was harder, yes, but I was more than prepared, so much so that when the end was on the horizon, I put the train on full speed and just ran it down mid. And this was when the whole experience really came apart for me. I watched a cutscene near the end of the game where Langer apprehensively describes the sorry state of the soldiers in the train, with our salvation so close yet so far, only to pop out of that cutscene doing double steam, double rations, singing Life is a Railway all the way to Vladivostok. At this point in the game, when things were supposed to be at their most desperate and tense, I was checked out. Alright, so what's the verdict on this game? Should you even bother after that tirade I just went on? Well, Last Train Home is a game that doesn't quite come together to reach its potential. Too many of its disparate parts feel like they were added because they're the sort of thing that goes in a strategy game without a thought as to what they're supposed to do for this game here. As a result, it's a lot of reliable mechanics you've seen before, uncomfortably jammed onto a train without a vision. It's disappointing because there are moments where the game does shine, and you can see some of that brilliance and creativity that the game promises. The presentation of the story and certain elements of the crew management and resource management really worked. They were just unfortunately lost in so many of the game's other shortcomings. I will say this. If you're watching this and think that this game looks cool and that the problems I've mentioned don't actually sound that bad, then yeah, I would say this game is worth at least a look. While I have a lot of criticism for it now, I keep thinking back on how, for a while, I was really enjoying playing the game and kept coming back to it. And I do have fond memories of the journey and the little piece of history I got to glimpse along with these ragtag soldiers. And perhaps in the end, that's all that really mattered. Thanks for watching. Hey everybody, thanks for taking the time to watch our video. We'd really appreciate it if you could hit us with a like and subscribe, ring that notification bell so you get notified when new videos come out. And hey, come on over to X, we'd love to talk about video games with you there. Thanks.